The leather-bound volume slipped from Tabitha Carson's hands and landed in the dust beside the general store steps, drawing laughter from three cowboys who leaned against the hitching post like vultures on a fence rail. "Look at Miss High and Mighty with her nose in a book again," sneered the tallest one, spitting tobacco juice that barely missed her skirt hem. "What good's all them words gonna do when you're old and alone, living off your daddy's charity?" Tabitha's cheeks burned as she bent to retrieve her copy of Shakespeare's collected sonnets, brushing the Wyoming dirt from its precious pages with trembling fingers. At 22, she had grown accustomed to such mockery in Platteville, this rough settlement carved from the high plains where book learning was considered less valuable than skill with a rope or a branding iron. The year was 1884, and in this corner of Wyoming Territory, a woman who preferred literature to quilting circles was an oddity at best and a target at worst. "Leave her be, Johnson," said a younger cowhand, though his voice lacked conviction. Johnson ignored him. "Tell me, Miss Carson, can them fancy words teach you how to cook a decent meal or mend a shirt? Because I hear tell you can barely manage either one." The other men laughed, and Tabitha clutched her book tighter against her chest. She had heard these criticisms before, usually from her stepmother, who despaired over Tabitha's preference for reading over domestic pursuits. Her mother had died when Tabitha was 8, leaving her father to remarry a practical woman named Eleanor, who believed books were a waste of candle wax and good eyesight. "At least I can read something beyond cattle brands," Tabitha said quietly, lifting her chin despite the tremor in her voice. She gathered her modest shopping basket and walked past them with as much dignity as she could muster, their renewed laughter following her down the dusty Main Street. The problem was not just the cowboys. The women of Platteville whispered about her too, calling her strange and unmarriageable. At her age, most women had husbands and at least one child. Tabitha had neither prospects nor interest in the rough men who occasionally came calling, driven more by her father's modest ranch holdings than any genuine affection for a woman they considered peculiar. Her father, Thomas Carson, owned a small cattle operation 10 miles outside town. It provided a living, nothing more. When she arrived home that afternoon, driving their weather-beaten wagon along the rutted track that passed for a road, she found Eleanor in the kitchen, her face set in its usual expression of disappointment. "You were gone 3 hours to fetch supplies that should have taken one," Eleanor said without preamble. "Let me guess you stopped to read at Widow Morrison's again." "I bought everything on your list," Tabitha replied, setting her basket on the rough wooden table. She did not mention that, yes, she had spent 40 minutes in the widow's small parlor discussing a new shipment of books that had arrived from Cheyenne. "Your father wants to speak with you," Eleanor said, her tone suggesting this was not good news. "He is in the barn." Tabitha found her father mending a harness, his weathered hands working the leather with practiced ease. At 56, Thomas Carson was still strong, but recent illness had hollowed his cheeks and added a stoop to his shoulders. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression made her stomach tighten. "Tabitha, sit down," he said, gesturing to a hay bale. "I prefer to stand, Papa." He sighed, setting aside his work. "Eleanor and I have been talking. You know my health has not been good. The doctor says my heart is not what it was. If something happens to me, Eleanor cannot run this place alone, and you—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You do not have the skills or the interest to manage a ranch." "I could learn," Tabitha said, though they both knew it was not true. She could ride adequately and had a good head for figures, but the physical demands of ranch life had never suited her. "Gerald Henderson has asked for your hand," her father continued, and Tabitha's heart sank. Gerald Henderson was 43, recently widowed with 5 children ranging from toddler to teenager. He was not cruel, but he was looking for an unpaid housekeeper and mother for his brood, nothing more. Papa, no. He is a good man with a prosperous ranch. You would be well provided for. He does not want a wife. He wants someone to raise his children and cook his meals. I would be a servant in my own marriage. Tabitha's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. I know I am a disappointment to you and Alina. I know I should be married by now. But please, not to Gerald Henderson. Her father's expression softened with something like regret. Then what do you want, daughter? You cannot stay here forever, reading your books and avoiding life. What kind of future is that? Tabitha had no answer that would satisfy him. She wanted what seemed impossible in this harsh land, a life of the mind, conversations that ranged beyond weather and cattle prices, a husband who valued her thoughts as much as her domestic abilities. Such things seemed as distant as the mountains visible on the western horizon. I need time to think, she said finally. Henderson wants an answer by month's end, her father replied. That gives you 2 weeks. She fled to her small room under the eaves, where shelves made from scrap lumber held her greatest treasures, nearly 60 books accumulated over 14 years, through careful saving and occasional gifts from her late mother's sister in Philadelphia. She ran her fingers along their spines, drawing comfort from their familiar presence. Dickens, Austen, the Bronte sisters, Whitman, Thoreau, and her beloved Shakespeare. These were her truest companions, offering worlds far removed from the dusty reality of Platteville. That night at supper, Alina spoke about the Henderson proposal as though it were already settled, discussing what household items Tabitha might bring to the marriage and how the wedding could be organized within the month. Tabitha ate in silence, her appetite gone, wondering if this was truly to be her fate. Decades of drudgery in Gerald Henderson's cheerless house, her books gathering dust while she scrubbed floors and changed diapers. The following Sunday, Tabitha took her wagon to town for church services, enduring the knowing looks from other women who had clearly heard about the Henderson proposal. After the service, she escaped to Widow Morrison's house, a small, neat structure behind the general store where the elderly woman lived alone, supported by a modest inheritance from her late husband. "My dear, you look absolutely miserable," Mrs. Morrison said, ushering her inside. "Tell me everything." Over tea, Tabitha poured out the whole story. The widow listened with sympathetic attention, her sharp blue eyes missing nothing. "Gerald Henderson is a decent man, but you are right, he wants a housekeeper, not a partner," Mrs. Morrison said when Tabitha finished. "However, you must also be practical. Your father is not well and your stepmother will not keep you on if he passes. What are your alternatives?" "I have been thinking about that," Tabitha admitted. "Aunt Catherine wrote that I could come to Philadelphia. She knows a family seeking a governess. And you would be happy living on their charity, teaching other women's children." "No," Tabitha said honestly, "but it would be better than marrying without affection." Mrs. Morrison refilled their cups thoughtfully. "There is a third option, though it is a risk. Warren Masters, who owns the Big Sky Ranch about 15 miles north, came by the store yesterday. He is looking for a housekeeper, someone to cook and maintain his house. He lost his previous housekeeper when she married his foreman last month. The pay would be enough for you to save money, gain independence. You would not be his wife, just his employee." "A single woman working for a bachelor rancher," Tabitha said. "The scandal would be enormous." "Warren Masters is not like the other ranchers around here," the widow said. "He is educated, for one thing. Went to some university back east before inheriting his family's ranch. He runs the largest operation in the county and keeps mostly to himself. I do not think gossip concerns him much. And he is only about 28 or so, not some old widower looking for a nursemaid. The idea took root in Tabitha's mind despite her reservations. Employment, even as a housekeeper, would give her independence and options. She could save money, perhaps eventually make her way to a larger city where books and learning were valued. It was not the romantic future she had dreamed of as a girl, but it was better than a loveless marriage. "Would you ask him if he would interview me?" she said finally. Mrs. Morrison smiled. "I will send word today." 3 days later, Tabitha found herself driving north toward the Big Sky Ranch, her stomach churning with nervousness. She had told her father only that she was considering a housekeeper position, not mentioning that her potential employer was an unmarried man. Alina would have locked her in her room if she had known. The Big Sky Ranch was impressive even by Wyoming standards. The main house was a solid 2-story structure of timber and stone, clearly built by someone with resources and taste. Outbuildings spread across the property in orderly fashion barns, bunkhouse, storage sheds, all well maintained. Cattle dotted the surrounding grassland by the hundreds, perhaps thousands. A man emerged from the barn as she pulled her wagon to a stop. He was tall and lean, dressed in work clothes that had seen honest use but were clean and well kept. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his face had the weathered quality of someone who spent their days outdoors, but there was intelligence in his gray eyes and something almost scholarly in the way he moved. "Miss Carson," he said, his voice deeper than she expected. "I am Warren Masters. Thank you for coming." She accepted his hand to step down from the wagon, noting the strength in his grip and the calluses that marked him as a working rancher despite his evident wealth. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 29 or 30, with a face that was more interesting than handsome, strong features, a mouth that looked like it smiled rarely, and those penetrating gray eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. "Mrs. Morrison spoke well of you," he continued, gesturing toward the house. "Please, come inside where we can talk properly." The interior of the house surprised her. She had expected rough bachelor quarters, but while the furnishings were masculine and practical, they were also of good quality. What truly caught her attention, however, were the bookshelves upon shelves lining the parlor walls, filled with more volumes than she had ever seen outside of a library. She must have made some sound, because Warren followed her gaze and his expression shifted slightly. "I inherited most of those from my father," he said. "He believed a man should educate himself beyond the basics. Do you read, Miss Carson?" It was the question that usually preceded mockery, but his tone held only genuine interest. "Yes," she said simply. "I love to read." "Then you are already more qualified than the last 3 candidates," he said dryly. "One woman demanded I get rid of the books because they collected dust. Another asked if I actually read them or just kept them for show. Please, sit down." They settled into chairs near the large stone fireplace, and Warren explained what the position would entail. The work was substantial cooking for him, and sometimes his foreman, cleaning and maintaining the house, managing household supplies and basic accounts. In exchange, she would receive a private room, meals, and a salary of $20 monthly, which was generous by housekeeper standards. "I will be frank with you, Miss Carson," Warren said after outlining the duties. "Mrs. Morrison told me about your situation, your father's illness, the Henderson proposal. I understand you need employment more than independence. That works in your favor because I need someone reliable who will not leave after 2 months to get married. But you should also know that hiring you will cause talk. You are young and unmarried, as am I. People will make assumptions." "I am aware of that," Tabitha said, lifting her chin. "But I would rather face gossip than marry without affection or live on charity." Something flickered in his eyes, respect, perhaps. "Mrs. Morrison also mentioned that you are mocked in town for reading, that the other women consider you peculiar for preferring books to more traditional pursuits." Heat flooded Tabitha's cheeks. "I can cook adequately and keep a house clean, Mr. Masters. My interests do not interfere with my ability to work." "That was not a criticism," he said quietly. "It was the reason I agreed to this interview. I have no patience for ignorance masquerading as practicality. The fact that you value learning tells me you have sense and intelligence, which are far more useful qualities in a housekeeper than most people realize." They discussed practical details. Her father's ranch was close enough that she could visit on Sundays. She could bring her personal belongings, including her books. She would take her meals separately, unless he requested her company for some reason. Everything was proper and businesslike, yet Tabitha felt the stirrings of something she had not expected. Hope that here, in this house full of books owned by a man who valued learning, she might find a kind of peace. "When can you start?" Warren asked finally. "I need to speak with my father first," Tabitha said. "But if he agrees, I could begin Monday next." "Then I will expect you Monday, provided your father gives his blessing. If he refuses, please send word and I will speak with him myself." As she drove home, Tabitha rehearsed how she would present this to her father. She need not have worried when she explained that Warren Masters was offering respectable employment at good wages. Her father's relief was palpable. He had been dreading forcing her into marriage with Henderson, and this seemed a reasonable alternative, at least temporarily. Eleanor was less sanguine. "Working for an unmarried man. The entire town will call you a harlot within a week." "The entire town already calls me a spinster and a bluestocking," Tabitha replied with more spirit than usual. "I fail to see how this is worse, and Mr. Masters is respectable and educated. He went to university." "Book learning," Eleanor sniffed, but she did not argue further. Perhaps she was simply glad to be rid of her peculiar stepdaughter. Gerald Henderson took the news with surprising grace, merely nodding when Tabitha's father explained that she had accepted other employment. "She would have been miserable with me anyway," he said frankly. "I need a practical woman, and Miss Carson is more scholar than homemaker." "No offense intended." "None taken," Tabitha thought, surprised by her own lack of feeling. She should have been insulted, but instead she felt only relief. The following Monday, she loaded her belongings into the wagon, 2 trunks of clothing, her precious books, a few personal items her mother had left her. Her father helped her carry everything down, his expression troubled. "Tabitha, if this does not work out, you can always come home," he said. "And if Masters proves to be anything less than a gentleman, you send word immediately." "I will, Papa," she promised, embracing him. "But I think this will be a good change." The drive to Big Sky Ranch felt different this time, not frightening but full of possibility. Warren met her at the door and helped carry her trunks upstairs to a spacious room with large windows overlooking the eastern pastures. It was easily twice the size of her room at home, with a real wardrobe, a comfortable bed, and best of all, empty shelves waiting for her books. "I had my foreman build those shelves yesterday," Warren said, nodding toward them. "Mrs. Morrison mentioned you owned quite a few books. I thought you should have a proper place to keep them." Tabitha felt sudden tears prick her eyes. Such a small gesture, yet it meant more than he could. No acknowledgement that her books were valuable, worthy of care and display. "Thank you," she managed. "That is very thoughtful." He looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I will let you settle in. Come down when you are ready, and I will show you the kitchen and pantry. We generally eat supper around 7, breakfast at 6. I take dinner out with the men most days, so you need not worry about a midday meal unless the weather is poor." Over the next few days, Tabitha learned the rhythms of the household. Warren left early each morning to work with his cattle and men, returning at irregular hours depending on the day's demands. He was quiet and self-contained, speaking little but never rudely. He tracked no mud through the house, cleaned up after himself, and treated her with unfailing courtesy. The work was substantial but not overwhelming. The house was large, but Warren used only a few rooms regularly. She cooked plain, hearty meals that he consumed without complaint, maintained the main rooms, and managed the household accounts with an ease that surprised them both. It turned out her years of reading had given her an excellent head for organization and figures. What surprised her more was the loneliness. Warren ate his meals in silence, reading the newspaper or going over ranch accounts. He barely spoke to her beyond necessary instructions. After supper, he would retreat to his study while she cleaned the kitchen, and then she would go to her room. It was a solitary existence, and she found herself missing even Aliner's critical commentary. On her first Sunday off, she drove to town and endured a barrage of questions from the church women, their eyes avid with curiosity and judgment. Was she truly just a housekeeper? Did Mr. Masters behave properly? Was she not concerned for her reputation? Tabitha answered with as much dignity as she could muster, but the experience left her drained. Mrs. Morrison provided sanctuary as always. "How are you managing?" the widow asked over tea. "The work is fine," Tabitha said. "Better than fine, actually. Mr. Masters is a perfect gentleman and the house is beautiful. It is just—" She paused, unsure how to articulate the hollowness she felt. "Lonely," Mrs. Morrison supplied. "Yes, we barely speak. I feel like I am living in a beautiful library with a ghost," the widow smiled. "Warren Masters has always been solitary. His father was a hard man, demanding perfection in everything. Warren learned young to keep his thoughts to himself. Give it time, my dear. You have only been there a week." But 2 weeks passed, then 3, and nothing changed. Tabitha cooked and cleaned and managed the household with growing efficiency. Warren nodded his approval of her work but offered nothing beyond that. She might have been a piece of furniture for all the personal interest he showed. Then came the evening that changed everything. Tabitha had prepared a beef stew for supper, one of the dishes she actually cooked well. Warren ate with his usual methodical efficiency, his attention on a ledger beside his plate. She was clearing the dishes when he suddenly spoke. "Miss Carson, may I ask you a question?" She nearly dropped the plate she was holding. "Of course, Mr. Masters." He hesitated, looking oddly uncomfortable. "You have been here nearly a month, and I have noticed you reading in the evenings when your work is done. What are you reading currently?" "Jane Eyre," she said, surprised by the question. "By Charlotte Brontë." "I read that years ago," he said. "I remember finding Rochester rather insufferable, though I suppose that was the point." He paused again, then said in a rush, as though forcing the words out, "Would you consider reading aloud in the evenings? To me, I mean." Tabitha stared at him. "You want me to read to you?" Color touched his cheeks. "It is an unusual request, I know. You may refuse without any effect on your employment. It is simply that I miss that. My mother used to read to my father and me when I was young, before she died. There is something peaceful about hearing a story read aloud that I have not experienced in years." "But if it makes you uncomfortable—" "No," Tabitha interrupted, her heart suddenly beating faster. "No, I would be happy to read to you, truly." The relief in his expression was unmistakable. "After supper, then. In the parlor, I can light a good fire. The evenings are growing cold." That night marked the beginning of a new pattern. After she cleaned the kitchen, Tabitha would join Warren in the parlor where he had indeed built up the fire until the room glowed with warmth. She would settle in one chair, he in another, and she would read while he listened, his eyes closed and his face relaxed in a way she had never seen during the day. Her voice, which she had always considered ordinary, seemed to please him. She read with expression, giving different voices to different characters, pausing at moments of tension, lingering over beautiful passages. Sometimes she would glance up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch, though he always looked away when their eyes met. They finished Jane Eyre in a week of nightly readings, and the evening she read the final pages Jane's return to Rochester. Their reunion and marriage, the emotion in the room felt almost tangible. When she closed the book, Warren sat silent for a long moment. "Thank you," he said finally. "I had forgotten how much I loved that story." "What shall I read next?" Tabitha asked. "Choose whatever you like. Your taste is clearly excellent." She selected Wuthering Heights, thinking he might enjoy the wild passion of the moors and Heathcliff's dark obsession. She was right. Warren became completely absorbed in the story, occasionally asking her to reread passages that particularly struck him. As the weeks passed, and autumn deepened into early winter, their evening readings became the center of Tabitha's existence. The work filled her days, but those hours in the firelight, sharing stories with a man who truly listened and appreciated them, fed her soul in ways she had not known it was starving. They began to talk between chapters, discussing the books and gradually, tentatively, other things. Warren spoke of his father, a stern man who had built the Big Sky Ranch from nothing and expected his son to maintain it perfectly. He had sent Warren to Yale University to study agriculture and business, intending him to return and apply modern methods to ranching. "He died the month after I graduated," Warren said one evening. "I never got to show him what I had learned, never got to prove that his investment in my education was worthwhile." "I am sure he knew," Tabitha said softly. "You have clearly made this ranch a success." "A success by most measures," Warren agreed, "but a lonely one. My father was not wrong when he used to warn me that books and learning would set me apart from others. I have never quite fit in with the other ranchers around here. They think I am strange, putting university ideas above tradition." "I understand that feeling," Tabitha said. "Being thought strange for what you love." His eyes met hers across the firelight. "Yes, I imagine you do." She told him about her own life, her mother's death, her father's well-meaning but conventional nature, Eleanor's constant criticism. The way other women in Platteville treated her as an oddity, the mockery from men who thought book learning was wasted on a woman. "Fools," Warren said with sudden vehemence. "Your intelligence is worth more than all their small-minded prejudices combined." The compliment warmed her more than the fire. No one had ever defended her that way, had ever suggested her love of learning was valuable rather than problematic. As November arrived with its bitter winds and early snow, Warren began requesting specific books. He wanted to hear Great Expectations, which made him laugh aloud at some of Dickens' more satirical passages. He asked for poetry, Wordsworth, Keats, Byron, and would sit with his eyes closed as she read, occasionally requesting she repeat a particularly beautiful stanza. One evening she read Shakespeare's sonnets, and when she reached Sonnet 116, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments," her voice faltered. The words seemed almost too intimate, too revealing of feelings she was only beginning to acknowledge in her own heart. Warren's eyes were open, watching her. "That is my favorite," he said quietly. "The idea that true love is unchanging, that it can endure any storm. My parents had that kind of love. It is rare." "Yes," Tabitha managed, "very rare. The atmosphere between them had shifted subtly but definitely. She found herself aware of him in ways that went beyond employee and employer, beyond even friends. The way firelight shadowed the planes of his face, the deep timbre of his voice when he spoke, the occasional brush of his hand against hers when he took a book from her. Warren seemed equally affected. He began finding excuses to linger in the kitchen while she cooked, asking questions about the meal or mentioning some ranch business that could easily have waited. His eyes followed her movements with an intensity that made her skin tingle with awareness. The crisis came in mid-November during an early blizzard that shut down the ranch for 3 days. The wind howled around the house like a living thing while snow piled in drifts against the windows. Warren could not leave to work with his cattle, and they were trapped together in the warm cocoon of the house. The first day, they maintained their usual polite distance. The second day, the barriers began to crack. They rayed together during the afternoon, not just in the evening, burning through most of David Copperfield. They talked more freely, laughed together at Dickens' absurd characters, debated the choices his heroes made. The third evening, as wind rattled the windows and snow continued to fall in sheets, Tabitha read from a collection of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poetry. When she reached, "How do I love thee?" her voice broke on the opening lines. Warren was beside her chair before she could take another breath, kneeling on the floor so their eyes were level. "Tabitha," he said, and it was the first time he had used her Christian name. "I have to know. These past months, these evenings together, have they meant to you what they have meant to me?" Her heart hammered so hard she could barely breathe. "What have they meant to you?" "Everything," he said simply. "You have brought light into a house that has been dark for too long. Intelligence and warmth and laughter. I hired you as a housekeeper, but somewhere along the way, you became essential to my happiness. I wake each morning thinking of seeing you at breakfast. I endure the day's work counting the hours until evening when we can sit together, and you will read to me in that beautiful voice. I am falling in love with you, Tabitha. I think I have been for weeks, and I need to know if there is any chance you could feel the same." Joy and terror flooded through her in equal measure. "Warren," she whispered, "I have loved you since the night you asked me to read to you, since I realized you valued the same things I do, that you saw me not as a peculiarity but as a person, but I am your employee." "The scandal, damn the scandal," he said fiercely. "I do not care what small-minded people think. If you love me, if there is any possibility you could be happy as my wife, then nothing else matters." "Your wife?" The word came out as barely a breath. "Yes. I am not asking you to be my housekeeper anymore, Tabitha. I am asking you to be my partner, my companion, the person I build a life with. I want to wake up beside you every morning. I want to discuss books and ideas over breakfast. I want to read with you every evening for the rest of our lives. Will you marry me?" She should be cautious, should consider all the implications and complications. But looking into his eyes, seeing the hope and fear and love there, she could not summon any doubt. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Warren, I will marry you." He pulled her from the chair and into his arms, and when he kissed her, it was nothing like she had imagined her first kiss would be. It was better, passionate and tender at once, full of promise and joy. She kissed him back with all the longing she had been suppressing, her hands tangling in his dark hair, her body pressed against his solid strength. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Warren rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this properly," he said. "Court you, marry you with your father's blessing. But God, Tabitha, I have wanted to do that for so long." "Since when?" she asked, hardly daring to believe this was real. "The first evening you read to me," he admitted. "When you gave Rochester that pompous voice, and made Jane so fierce and proud. I looked at you in the firelight and thought that I could spend the rest of my life listening to you and never be bored for a moment." They sat together on the sofa, properly distant now but holding hands, talking late into the night. Warren spoke of his dreams for the ranch, for using his education to improve breeding stock and land management. Tabitha shared her secret hope of perhaps teaching reading to children in the area, of making education more accessible. "We could build a school," Warren said immediately. "On ranch land. Hire a teacher, stock it with books. I have the resources, and it would benefit everyone in the county." "You would do that?" Tabitha asked. "I would do anything that brought you joy," he said simply. "Your happiness has become essential to mine." The next morning, the storm broke and the world emerged into brilliant sunshine reflecting off pristine snow. Warren rode to the Carson ranch as soon as the roads were passable, formally asking Thomas Carson for permission to marry his daughter. Her father, perhaps relieved that his difficult daughter had found a successful and respectable match, gave his blessing readily. Eleanor managed to look both surprised and smug, as though she had planned this outcome all along. The wedding was set for the first week of December, giving them just 3 weeks to prepare. It would be a small ceremony in Platteville's church, followed by a reception at the ranch. Tabitha cared little for the details. She simply wanted to be Warren's wife, to make their arrangement official and permanent. The town buzzed with gossip, of course. The strange spinster and the solitary rancher, the housekeeper who had snared her wealthy employer. But Warren's position in the community and his obvious devotion to Tabitha silenced the worst of the talk. And when Mrs. Morrison let it be known that Warren Masters was a highly educated gentleman who appreciated Tabitha's intelligence, many of the women who had mocked her book reading suddenly found it quite romantic that the richest rancher in the county wanted a scholarly wife. Gerald Henderson even offered congratulations, saying frankly that Tabitha and Warren seemed much better suited than he and Tabitha would have been. "You need someone who understands you," he said. "Masters clearly does." The 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Tabitha sewed her wedding dress with help from Mrs. Morrison, a simple but elegant gown of deep blue velvet. Warren commissioned a beautiful ring from a jeweler in Cheyenne, a gold band set with a small sapphire. Their evenings continued as before, but now Warren would sit beside her on the sofa rather than across the room, his arm around her shoulders as she read. They would pause frequently to kiss, to talk, to simply be together. Warren was tender and patient, respecting her innocence while making clear his desire for her. "After we are married," he said one evening, his voice rough with want, "I am going to spend an entire week just learning everything about you. Every thought, every dream, every inch of your beautiful skin." Tabitha blushed furiously but felt anticipation curl through her body. "Only a week," she managed to tease. "You are right," he said, kissing her thoroughly. "That will never be enough time." The wedding day arrived with crisp December cold and clear skies. Tabitha dressed in her blue velvet gown, her hair arranged by Mrs. Morrison in an elegant style that made her look sophisticated and beautiful. Her father drove her to the church, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Your mother would have loved this," he said. "Seeing you marry a man who truly values you for who you are. She was a great reader too, you know. I think that is where you got it from. She would have approved of Warren Masters." The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. Warren stood at the altar in a dark suit that made him look handsome and distinguished, his eyes never leaving Tabitha's face as she walked down the aisle. When they spoke their vows, his voice shook slightly with emotion. "I, Warren Masters, take you, Tabitha Carson, to be my wedded wife. I promise to honor your mind as well as your heart, to value your thoughts and dreams as much as my own. I promise to build a life with you where books and learning and love are cherished equally. This I vow before God and these witnesses." Tabitha's own voice was clearer. "I, Tabitha Carson, take you, Warren Masters, to be my wedded husband. I promise to be your partner and companion, to share my life and thoughts with you completely. I promise to read to you every night for as long as we both shall live. This I vow before God and these witnesses." The promise to read to him every night made several people smile, including the minister. Warren's eyes shone with love and happiness as he slipped the sapphire ring onto her finger. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister intoned. "You may kiss your bride." Warren did so with considerable enthusiasm, drawing a ripple of laughter from the assembled guests. When they finally broke apart, Tabitha was breathless and glowing. The reception at the ranch house was a festive affair. Warren had hired musicians from Cheyenne, and there was dancing and food and genuine celebration. Even people who had previously mocked Tabitha seemed caught up in the joy of the occasion. She danced with her father, with Warren's foreman, with several of the cowboys who worked the ranch. But mostly she danced with Warren, who held her close and whispered in her ear about how beautiful she looked and how eager he was for their guests to leave. Finally, as evening fell and the guests began to depart, Warren and Tabitha stood together on the porch, waving goodbye. When the last wagon disappeared down the drive, Warren turned to his wife with a look that made her knees weak. "Alone at last," he said, sweeping her into his arms and carrying her over the threshold of what was now truly their home together. He carried her upstairs to his bedroom, their bedroom now, and set her gently on her feet beside the large bed. A fire burned in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the room. Warren had made sure there were candles lit and fresh flowers on the dresser, small touches that revealed his romantic nature. "I have never done this before," Tabitha admitted, suddenly nervous. "Neither have I," Warren said, cupping her face in his hands. "We will figure it out together." "I love you, Tabitha. That is all that matters." He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, his hands moving to the buttons of her dress with careful patience. Tabitha responded with growing confidence, helping him remove his jacket and shirt, marveling at the solid warmth of his skin under her hands. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, awkward in places but beautiful in its honesty. Warren was gentle with her, talking her through her nervousness, making sure she felt pleasure as well as the initial discomfort. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the bed, Tabitha's head on Warren's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow to normal. "That was even better than I imagined," Warren said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "And I have been imagining it quite a lot lately." Tabitha laughed, feeling deliciously wicked and happy. "So have I, though I barely knew what I was imagining." "We have the rest of our lives to practice," Warren pointed out, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I intend to get very, very good at making you happy." "You already make me happy," Tabitha said. "Happier than I ever thought possible." They talked for hours, wrapped in each other's arms, speaking of their hopes and dreams for the future. Warren wanted to expand the ranch gradually, using careful breeding to improve his herds. Tabitha wanted to start the school they had discussed, perhaps beginning with just a few children and growing from there. "I want children of our own too," Warren admitted. "Not right away, perhaps. I want time with just you first. But eventually, I would love to have a house full of children and books and laughter." "That sounds perfect," Tabitha agreed, imagining little versions of Warren running through the house, hopefully inheriting his intelligence and kind heart. Eventually, Warren remembered something and sat up, reaching for a package on the bedside table. "I have a wedding gift for you," he said, handing it to her. Tabitha unwrapped it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. "For your thoughts," Warren explained. "For stories or poetry or whatever you want to write. You have such a beautiful way with words when you read. I thought perhaps you might enjoy creating your own." Tears filled her eyes. "Warren, this is too much. The ring, this journal, nothing is too much for you," he interrupted. "You deserve to be cherished, Tabitha. You deserve someone who sees your worth and celebrates it. I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt how precious you are to me." That night, wrapped in her husband's arms in their warm bed, Tabitha reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few months. She had gone from being mocked and pressured into a loveless marriage to being cherished by a man who valued everything that made her herself. As winter deepened and Christmas approached, Tabitha and Warren settled into married life with surprising ease. They developed routines that suited them both, Warren working the ranch during the day while Tabitha managed the household and began planning for the school they wanted to build. Their evenings were sacred, always reserved for reading together and talking. True to her wedding vow, Tabitha read to Warren every night. Sometimes he would read to her as well, his deep voice giving new life to familiar stories. They discovered they could discuss books for hours, debating motivations and themes and the social context of various works. Christmas was a quiet affair, just the two of them and a few ranch hands who had nowhere else to go. Tabitha cooked a feast while Warren decorated the house with pine boughs and ribbon. They exchanged simple gifts. She gave him a new edition of Homer's Odyssey that she had secretly ordered from Philadelphia. He gave her a complete set of Jane Austen's novels, beautifully bound in leather. "How did you know I did not have all of these?" Tabitha asked, delighted. "I may have examined your book collection quite carefully," Warren admitted. "You had Pride and Prejudice and Emma, but not the others. I thought you should have the complete set." She kissed him thoroughly by way of thanks, and they spent the rest of the evening reading Persuasion aloud to each other, taking turns with chapters. As January arrived with bitter cold and frequent snow, Warren began teaching Tabitha more about ranch management. He explained his breeding program, showed her the account books, discussed his plans for spring. She proved to have an excellent head for business, catching errors he had missed and suggesting more efficient ways to organize his records. "You should go to Cheyenne in the spring and meet with the cattle buyers yourself," she said one evening as they reviewed the books together. "You are selling your stock too cheap. I looked at the market prices and you could get at least 10% more if you negotiated directly." Warren stared at her. "How did you learn about market prices?" "I read the agricultural reports you get from the Stockmen's Association," Tabitha said. "They publish price listings. It was quite interesting, actually." He laughed and pulled her into his arms. "I married a genius. God, I love you." "I love you too," she said, kissing him, "even if you are a terrible negotiator." "Then it is lucky I have you to keep me from being cheated," Warren said. "From now on, we make all business decisions together." True to his word, he began consulting Tabitha on all major ranch matters. She had insights he had never considered, approaching problems from angles his traditional ranching knowledge had overlooked. Together, they made an excellent team. In February, Warren hired a carpenter to begin building the school. It would be a simple structure, one large room with windows for light and a good stove for heat, but it would have shelves for books and desks for students. Tabitha spent weeks planning curriculum and writing to her aunt in Philadelphia for recommendations on primers and educational materials. They decided to hire a young teacher from back east, a woman named Sarah Mitchell who came with excellent references and a genuine love of teaching. She would live in a small cottage Warren built near the school, maintaining propriety while being close enough to walk to work. The school opened in April with 12 students, children of ranch hands and nearby settlers who were thrilled at the opportunity for their children to receive free education. Tabitha visited often, bringing books from her own collection and helping where she could. Watching children discover the joy of reading filled her with profound satisfaction. "This is your doing," Warren said one evening as they watched the sunset from their porch. "Those children have opportunities they never would have had without you." "Without us," Tabitha corrected. "You built the school, you pay the teacher, I just had the idea." "Ideas matter," Warren said, pulling her close. "Your ideas have made my life immeasurably richer." Spring turned to summer, and Tabitha discovered she was pregnant. The morning sickness started in June, undeniable and persistent. Warren was beside himself with excitement and concern, fussing over her until she had to order him to stop. "I am having a baby, not dying of consumption," she said, exasperated but touched by his devotion. "Women do this all the time." "Yes, but you are not just any woman," Warren said. "You are my wife, and I reserve the right to worry excessively." Dr. Harrison from Platteville confirmed the pregnancy and said Tabitha was healthy and the baby should arrive in late February or early March. Warren immediately began planning modifications to the house, a nursery near their bedroom, safer stairs, 1,000 other details that Tabitha mostly ignored. Her pregnancy was relatively easy after the first few months. She continued her normal activities, managing the household and visiting the school, reading to Warren every evening. As her body changed, Warren was endlessly fascinated, his hands gentle on her growing belly, his eyes full of wonder. "I cannot believe there is a person in there," he said one night, feeling the baby kick against his palm. "A person we made together." "I can believe it," Tabitha said dryly. "The person kicks me constantly and makes me have to use the chamber pot 6 times a night." But she was happy, gloriously so. The baby felt like the final piece of the life she and Warren were building together, a life based on love and respect and shared interests. As autumn arrived and Tabitha's belly swelled larger, Warren became increasingly protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy or climb ladders or do any of the dozen other things she insisted she was perfectly capable of managing. "You will thank me when our child arrives safely," he said, when she complained about his hovering. "I will thank you now if you stop treating me like spun glass," she retorted, but without real heat. His concern came from love, and she could never truly be angry about that. Winter came early that year, snow falling in November and continuing through December. Tabitha spent her days preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets with help from Mrs. Morrison. Warren built a beautiful cradle from oak, carving delicate designs into the headboard, a small house to represent their home, a book to represent their love of reading, a heart to represent their love for each other and the child to come. "Warren, this is exquisite," Tabitha said, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "You should have been a craftsman." "I prefer being a rancher married to you," Warren said, "but I am glad you like it. I wanted our child to have something made with love, not just bought from a store." Christmas was magical that year. Tabitha was 8 months pregnant and moved slowly, but she insisted on decorating the house and preparing a feast. Warren invited Mrs. Morrison and Tabitha's father to join them, and they spent a joyful day together, talking and laughing and speculating about the coming baby. "I hope for a healthy child, boy or girl," Warren said when pressed about his preferences. "Though I admit I would love a daughter with Tabitha's eyes and love of books. And I would love a son with your strength and kindness," Tabitha added, But truly, healthy is all that matters. The baby arrived on a frigid February night during a howling snowstorm. Tabitha's labor began at supper time, the pains gradually intensifying until there was no doubt what was happening. Warren sent one of his men for Dr. Harrison and Mrs. Morrison, though the doctor almost did not make it through the storm. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Warren refused to leave Tabitha's side despite Mrs. Morrison's suggestions that he wait elsewhere. He held her hand through the worst contractions, wiped her forehead with cool cloths, whispered encouragement when she was certain she could not continue. "You are the strongest woman I have ever known," he said as dawn light filtered through the windows. "You can do this, my love." Just a little longer. Finally, as morning sun broke through the storm clouds, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. Dr. Harrison placed the baby in Tabitha's arms, and she looked down at the small, perfect face with overwhelming love. "A son," Warren said, his voice choked with emotion. "We have a son." They named him Thomas, after Tabitha's father, with the middle name of William after Warren's father. Thomas William Masters was a healthy baby with his mother's blue eyes and his father's dark hair. Warren was besotted from the first moment, holding his son with careful reverence and gazing at him as though he were a miracle. "I never knew I could love anything this much," Warren admitted that first night after Tabitha had nursed the baby and they were all three curled together in the bed. "Except you. The two of you are my entire world." Tabitha was exhausted but happy beyond measure. "Read to me," she asked. "I am too tired to read, but I would love to hear your voice." So Warren read to her from Wordsworth, his deep voice soft so as not to disturb the sleeping baby, while Tabitha drifted in and out of sleep. It was perfect. She thought hazily her husband, her son, and poetry, all the things she loved most in the world together in one room. The weeks after Thomas's birth were challenging in ways Tabitha had not anticipated. The baby cried often, especially at night, and she was constantly tired. But Warren was an involved father, walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, learning to soothe the baby's cries. "My father never did this," Warren said one night as he rocked their son. He believed child rearing was women's work, but he missed so much. "I do not want to miss a moment of watching our son grow." As Thomas grew from newborn to infant, his personality began to emerge. He was curious and alert, his eyes following movement and light with intense focus. Warren was convinced the baby was a genius, though Tabitha pointed out that all babies were curious. "Not like this," Warren insisted. "Look how he watches when you read. He is already developing a love of books." Tabitha laughed but secretly agreed. She read aloud often, both for Warren and for their son, believing that exposure to language and stories from the beginning would benefit him. Spring arrived with its usual burst of activity on the ranch. The school reopened after winter break with 15 students now, word having spread about the quality of education being offered. Sarah Mitchell, the teacher, reported that 2 of her students were reading at levels far beyond their ages. "This is what education can do," Tabitha said to Warren as they watched the children playing outside the school one afternoon. "Imagine if every child in Wyoming had this opportunity." "We cannot educate every child in Wyoming," Warren said practically, "but we can educate the ones within reach. And perhaps others will follow our example." As summer approached and Thomas reached 4 months old, Tabitha felt herself settling into motherhood. She had worried that she would miss having time to read, but she found that she simply adjusted her schedule. She read while nursing Thomas, read aloud to him during the day, and still spent evenings reading with Warren after the baby went to sleep. "You are managing motherhood and everything else remarkably well," Warren observed one evening. "I am in awe of you." "I have help," Tabitha pointed out. "You do as much for Thomas as I do, and Mrs. Morrison visits twice a week to give me breaks. I could not do this alone." "You will never have to do anything alone," Warren said, kissing her. "We are partners, remember, in everything." One afternoon in July, Tabitha took Thomas to town for supplies. She encountered several of the women who had once mocked her book reading, now eager to admire her baby and ask about life at the Big Sky Ranch. "You seem so happy," one woman said, almost wistfully. "I had heard that educated men made difficult husbands, but Mr. Masters seems devoted to you." "He is," Tabitha said simply. "We are well suited." What she did not say was that Warren's education was precisely what made him such a good husband. He valued her mind as well as her domestic abilities. He consulted her on decisions and respected her opinions. Their marriage was a true partnership built on mutual respect and shared interests. As Thomas grew through his first year, Tabitha marveled at how her life had transformed. 2 years ago, she had been a lonely spinster mocked for her love of books, facing a future of either dependence on family or a loveless marriage. Now she was wife to a man she loved deeply, mother to a beautiful son, and able to pursue her interest in education through the school. Thomas's first birthday was celebrated with a small party. Warren's foreman and his wife, Mrs. Morrison, Tabitha's father and stepmother, and the teacher, Sarah Mitchell. Thomas was delighted by all the attention, laughing and clapping his chubby hands as everyone sang to him. "He looks just like you," Tabitha's father said to Warren, "but I think he has Tabitha's disposition, always observing, always thinking." "God help us all if he inherits both our stubborn streaks," Warren said with a laugh. That night, after the guests had left and Thomas was asleep in his cradle, Warren and Tabitha sat together on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "A year ago he did not exist," Warren marveled, "and now I cannot imagine life without him." "I feel the same," Tabitha said. "About both of you. 2 years ago I had nearly given up hope of finding this kind of happiness." Warren pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. "Read to me," he asked, as he did most nights. "Always," Tabitha promised. They went inside to the parlor, where their reading had first brought them together. Tabitha selected a book of poetry and settled into her favorite chair while Warren lit the lamps and built up the fire. As her voice rose and fell with the rhythm of the verses, she felt profound contentment. This was her life: books and love and family, all intertwined in ways that fed her soul. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew into a bright, active toddler who did indeed seem to love books as much as his parents. Warren taught him to ride before he was 3, putting him on a gentle mare and leading them around the corral while Tabitha watched with her heart in her throat. The school continued to thrive, expanding to 2 rooms and hiring a second teacher. Tabitha became more involved, creating a lending library where families could borrow books to read at home. The response was overwhelming. People who had never owned a book in their lives were suddenly reading to their children every night, just as Tabitha read to Thomas and Warren. When Thomas was 3, Tabitha became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Warren was still excessively protective, but had learned to temper his concern somewhat. Their daughter arrived on a mild October afternoon, her birth much faster than Thomas's had been. Warren delivered her himself, Dr. Harrison arriving only minutes after the baby was safely in her mother's arms. "A daughter," Warren breathed, his eyes wet with tears. "Oh, Tabitha, we have a daughter." They named her Catherine Alina Masters, after Tabitha's mother and her stepmother, a gesture that brought both women to tears when they heard. Catherine had her father's dark hair and her mother's delicate features, and from the first, she was a calm, peaceful baby who rarely cried. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help care for her. "She is so small," he would say in wonder. "We must protect her." "Yes," Warren agreed. "That is what big brothers do." With 2 children, life became busier but no less joyful. Tabitha still read every night, though now the audience often included Thomas, who would snuggle between his parents and listen with rapt attention even to books meant for adults. Catherine would sleep in Warren's arms while Tabitha's voice wove stories that transported them all to other times and places. The ranch prospered under Warren's management and Tabitha's business insights. They bought additional land, improved their breeding stock, and became one of the most successful operations in Wyoming. But Warren never let success change his priorities. His family always came first, and every evening found him home for supper and reading time. When Thomas was 5 and Catherine 2, Tabitha began teaching Thomas to read himself. He proved an eager student, recognizing letters and sounding out words with growing confidence. Warren would sit with them during lessons, his pride in his son's accomplishments evident. "He will go to university one day," Warren predicted. "Study whatever interests him most." "And Catherine," Tabitha asked, "will you send her to university too?" Warren looked shocked that she would even question it. "Of course. Education is for everyone, not just men. She will have every opportunity Thomas has." Such attitudes were still unusual in Wyoming, but Tabitha had long since stopped being surprised by her husband's progressive views. He judged people by their character and intelligence, not their gender or social position. The school now served over 30 students from across the county, and Tabitha had begun corresponding with educators in the East about best practices and curriculum development. She published articles in education journals about rural schooling, gaining a small reputation as an expert on the subject. "You are becoming famous," Warren teased her one evening. "Soon you will be too important to read to a simple rancher." "Never," Tabitha said, kissing him. "Reading to you is still my favorite part of every day." As their children grew and their lives continued to blossom, Tabitha and Warren never lost the connection that reading together had given them. It was their time to reconnect after busy days, to share ideas and stories, to simply be together. The ritual that had begun when she was his housekeeper continued through all the years of their marriage, a constant in their ever-changing lives. When Thomas turned 7, he began attending the school full-time, quickly becoming one of Sarah Mitchell's best students. Catherine, now 4, would sometimes accompany her mother to the school and sit quietly looking at picture books while Tabitha worked with the teachers on curriculum. One afternoon, as Tabitha watched her children playing in the schoolyard, Mrs. Morrison joined her. "Do you remember when you first came to me, desperate to avoid marrying Gerald Henderson?" the widow asked. "Of course," Tabitha said. "I felt so trapped, so hopeless about my future." "And now look at you," Mrs. Morrison said with satisfaction. "A happy wife, a mother, making real contributions to this community. You found exactly what you were looking for." "I found more than I was looking for," Tabitha corrected. "I was hoping for respect and independence. I found love and partnership and purpose. Warren gave me all of that." "You gave it to each other," the widow said wisely. "That is how the best marriages work." That evening, as Warren and Tabitha sat in their usual places with Thomas between them and Catherine on Warren's lap, Tabitha selected a new book she had ordered from Boston Louisa May Alcott's Little Women, published 15 years earlier, but new to their collection. As she read the opening lines about the March sisters and their mother, Thomas listened with fascination, and Catherine played with her father's fingers. Warren's eyes met Tabitha's over their children's heads, full of love and contentment. This was her life, Tabitha thought with profound gratitude. She had been mocked for reading books, told she was too peculiar to find happiness. But she had found a rancher who said, "Read to me every night," and in doing so, had found everything she had ever wanted. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved both books and ranching, spending mornings studying with remarkable focus and afternoons helping his father with the cattle. Catherine proved more artistic, preferring to draw and paint, though she also loved stories and would beg her mother to read to her for hours. When Thomas was 10 and Catherine 7, Tabitha became pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two. She was 34 now, and her body did not bounce back as easily. But Warren was attentive as ever, taking over many of her household duties and hiring additional help so she could rest. Their second son arrived in early spring, a robust baby they named Samuel after Warren's favorite uncle. Samuel was loud and energetic from birth, so different from his quiet sister that Tabitha joked he must have been switched with someone else's baby at birth. "No, he is definitely ours," Warren said, laughing as Samuel shrieked his displeasure at having his diaper changed. "He has your determination and my stubbornness. God help us all." With 3 children, the house was full of noise and activity. Thomas helped with his younger siblings, reading to Catherine and holding Samuel when he fussed. The children adored their father, who somehow always found time for them despite his ranch responsibilities. The school continued to expand, now requiring 3 teachers and serving nearly 50 students. Tabitha had largely stepped back from day-to-day operations, trusting Sarah Mitchell to run things while she focused on her own children. But she still visited regularly and maintained the lending library, which had grown to over 200 volumes. One evening when Samuel was about 6 months old, sleeping peacefully for once, Warren suggested they resume their nightly reading tradition, which had been somewhat disrupted by the new baby's arrival. "I have missed this," he admitted as Tabitha settled into her chair with their current book, a novel by Thomas Hardy. "The children are wonderful, but I miss having you all to myself for a while each evening." "As do I," Tabitha said. "Let us make it a priority again." The older children can read themselves before bed, and Samuel will adjust to the schedule. So they returned to their routine, and Tabitha found that Warren was right. They needed this time together to maintain their connection as husband and wife amid the demands of parenthood. Those quiet evening hours when they shared stories and discussed ideas kept their marriage strong and vital. When Thomas turned 12, Warren began teaching him more advanced ranch management, taking him to cattle auctions and explaining the business side of ranching. The boy proved to have both his mother's head for figures and his father's instinct for livestock. Warren was clearly grooming him to eventually take over the Big Sky Ranch, though he was careful not to pressure the boy into a future he might not want. "If Thomas wants to go to university and become a professor or a lawyer or anything else, that is fine," Warren told Tabitha. "The ranch will be here if he wants it, but his happiness matters more than my plans." Catherine, meanwhile, showed an interest in teaching. At 9, she would play school with her younger brother, patiently teaching him his letters and numbers. Sarah Mitchell reported that Catherine often helped the younger students during recess, showing a natural gift for instruction. "Perhaps she will take over the school one day," Tabitha mused. "Perhaps," Warren agreed. "Or perhaps she will start her own school somewhere else. The point is to give all our children the education and opportunities to choose their own paths. As Samuel grew from baby to toddler, his energetic personality proved both exhausting and delightful. He was into everything, fearless and curious, requiring constant supervision. Thomas and Catherine took turns watching him, and Warren would often take the boy with him on his ranch rounds, letting Samuel ride in front of him on his horse. The years slipped by in a blur of school events, ranch work, family meals, and evening reading sessions. Tabitha's hair began to show threads of silver, and Warren's temples grayed, but their love for each other only deepened with time. They had weathered challenges together: difficult calving seasons, harsh winters, childhood illnesses, and each trial had strengthened their partnership. When Thomas turned 16, he asked if he could spend a year at university before deciding whether to commit to ranching. Warren immediately agreed, helping his son apply to several schools and ultimately sending him to Yale, his own alma mater. "I will miss him terribly," Tabitha admitted as they prepared to send Thomas east, "but I am so proud of him for wanting to expand his horizons." "He will come back," Warren predicted. "He loves the ranch too much to leave it forever, but he needs to see the world, understand his options. We have given him that gift." Thomas left in September, promising to write often. His letters arrived weekly, full of descriptions of his classes and new friends and the wonders of the East Coast. Catherine read them aloud to the family at supper, and Samuel would ask endless questions about his absent brother. With Thomas gone, the household felt quieter. Catherine was now 13 and increasingly independent, dividing her time between her studies and helping at the school. Samuel, at 6, had started attending classes himself and was proving as bright as his siblings, if considerably more rambunctious. Tabitha found herself with more free time than she had experienced in years. She used it to increase her involvement with the school again, working with the teachers to develop more advanced curriculum for older students. She also began writing a book about education in rural communities, drawing on her years of experience and observation. Warren encouraged her project, proud of his wife's accomplishments. "You should be recognized for what you have achieved," he said. "The school, the lending library, the changes you have made in how people think about education, it is remarkable." "We achieved it," Tabitha corrected, as she always did. "None of this would have been possible without your support and resources. And none of it would have happened without your vision and determination," Warren countered. They had been having this argument for nearly 20 years, each insisting the other deserved more credit. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Warren surprised Tabitha with a trip to Cheyenne. They left the younger children with Mrs. Morrison and spent 3 days in the territorial capital, staying in the finest hotel and attending the theater. It was a second honeymoon of sorts, a chance to reconnect away from the demands of ranch and family. 20 years, Warren mused as they danced together at a formal ball. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean," Tabitha said, resting her head against his shoulder. "Sometimes I still feel like that nervous young woman you hired as a housekeeper. Other times, I cannot remember life before you." "I remember life before you," Warren said quietly. "It was lonely and gray. You brought color and warmth and purpose. You gave me a family and a real home, not just a house. I fall more in love with you every single day." Tabitha felt tears prick her eyes. After 20 years and 3 children, Warren could still make her feel like the most precious person in the world. "I love you too," she whispered. "Forever." They returned home refreshed and reconnected, ready to face whatever came next. Thomas returned from his first year at university, full of new ideas and energy, immediately throwing himself into helping with the ranch. He had missed Wyoming more than he expected, he confessed, though he planned to return to Yale to complete his degree. Catherine, now 14, had blossomed into a lovely young woman who reminded Tabitha achingly of her own youth, bookish and thoughtful, more comfortable with ideas than social niceties. Several young men had begun paying attention to her, but Catherine showed little interest, focused on her studies and her work at the school. "She is just like you were," Warren observed fondly. "Too intelligent to be satisfied with the limited options most women are offered." "The world is changing," Tabitha said. "She will have opportunities I never dreamed of. Women are attending university now, pursuing professions. Catherine could be a teacher or a professor or anything she wants." Samuel, meanwhile, had decided he wanted to be a veterinarian, fascinated by the science of animal health. Warren encouraged this interest, letting the boy help when they treated sick cattle and ordering books on animal medicine for him to study. As the years continued, the family found its rhythms. Thomas would spend winters at Yale and summers at the ranch, eventually graduating with honors and returning home permanently to work alongside his father. Catherine went to the Women's College of Denver at 17, studying education and literature, visiting home during breaks. Samuel proved to be a gifted student with a particular aptitude for science. Through it all, Tabitha and Warren maintained their nightly reading tradition. Even when the children were home and grown, even when ranch business was pressing, they always found time to sit together in the evening while Tabitha read. It was their ritual, the foundation of their relationship, and they guarded it carefully. Tabitha's book on rural education was published when she was 42, receiving favorable reviews in educational journals. She was invited to speak at conferences, travel to other states to consult with school systems. Warren was immensely proud, though he worried about her traveling alone. "Come with me," Tabitha suggested when she received an invitation to speak in Denver. "We could make a trip of it, visit Catherine at college." So Warren accompanied her, sitting in the audience as his wife spoke eloquently about the importance of accessible education and the unique challenges of rural schooling. Watching her command the room with her intelligence and passion, Warren felt the same overwhelming love he had experienced the first time she read to him in his parlor. After her speech, several people approached to ask questions and share their own experiences. Warren stood back, letting Tabitha shine, but one gentleman sought him out specifically. "You must be very proud of your wife, Mr. Masters," the man said. "She is clearly brilliant." "I am," Warren agreed simply. "I have been in awe of her for over 20 years. That night in their Denver hotel room, Tabitha was flushed with success and excitement. "People were actually interested in what I had to say," she marveled. "They took notes. They asked for copies of my book." "Of course they did," Warren said, pulling her into his arms. "You are an expert in your field, Tabitha. You have knowledge and experience that others need. You should be proud of yourself." "I am," she admitted, "but I am also grateful. None of this would have been possible without you believing in me first." "You make it easy to believe," Warren said, kissing her. "You are extraordinary." They visited Catherine at college the next day, finding her thriving in the academic environment. She showed them around campus, introduced them to her professors, bubbled with enthusiasm about her classes. It was clear she had found her place. "I want to get my degree and then perhaps pursue graduate studies," Catherine told them over dinner. "Professor Williams thinks I could get a position at a university eventually, teaching literature or education." "That is wonderful," Tabitha said, though she felt a pang at the thought of her daughter choosing a life far from Wyoming. "You should pursue every opportunity that interests you. Though we hope you will visit home regularly," Warren added. Your mother and brothers miss you terribly." As they drove back to Platteville, Tabitha reflected on how much the world had changed since her youth. Her daughter could attend university, pursue a profession, choose her own path in ways that had been unthinkable when Tabitha was Catherine's age. It was progress, hard-won and still incomplete, but progress nonetheless. The years continued their steady march. Thomas married at 25, choosing a practical, intelligent young woman named Mary who had been raised on a neighboring ranch. She fit seamlessly into the master's family, appreciating both the ranching life and the family's love of books and learning. Within 2 years, Thomas and Mary had given Warren and Tabitha their first grandchild, a boy named James. Holding her grandson for the first time, Tabitha felt the circle of life completing itself. She thought of her own mother, who had died too young to see Tabitha's children. She hoped her mother would have been proud of the family Tabitha had built, the life she had created from such unpromising beginnings. Catherine returned home after completing her bachelor's degree, taking a position as head teacher at the school that Tabitha and Warren had founded. She had offers from universities in the East, but she chose to come home, at least for a while, wanting to give back to the community that had nurtured her. Samuel left for veterinary college in Colorado at 18, writing enthusiastic letters about his studies and his plans to return to Wyoming to practice. He wanted to specialize in large animal medicine, serving the ranching community that had raised him. Warren, now in his 50s, began gradually turning over more ranch management to Thomas, though he still rode out most days to check on the cattle and the land he loved. His hair was silver now, and years of outdoor work had weathered his face, but he was still strong and vital, still devoted to his family and his wife. Tabitha had aged as well, her dark hair streaked with white, her figure fuller than in youth. But Warren still looked at her with the same love and desire he had shown on their wedding night, still told her she was beautiful, still requested that she read to him every evening. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch house. The home was filled with family and friends, former students and teachers, ranchers and townspeople who had benefited from the master's family's generosity and vision over the decades. Speech. Someone called, and Warren stood reluctantly, never comfortable being the center of attention. 30 years ago, I made the best decision of my life, he said simply. I asked a remarkable woman to read to me, and she said yes. Everything good that has come since this ranch's success, the school, our children, and now our grandchildren, all of it stems from that moment. Tabitha, you have been my partner, my love, my best friend. Thank you for 30 years of happiness. I look forward to 30 more. Tabitha stood and kissed him to applause from the assembled guests. You asked me to read to you, she said softly, for his ears only. But you gave me so much more respect, love, a family, a purpose. You let me be myself when the world told me I should be someone different. I love you, Warren Masters, today and always. That night, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, Warren and Tabitha sat in their usual places in the parlor. The chairs had been roof-upholstered over the years, and the shelves held even more books than before, but the ritual was unchanged. What shall we read tonight? Warren asked. Tabitha smiled and reached for a worn volume, the same copy of Jane Eyre she had been reading the night Warren first asked her to read aloud to him. I think we should go back to the beginning, she said. So she read the familiar words, her voice perhaps not as young as it had been 30 years ago, but no less compelling. Warren listened with his eyes closed, as he always did, his face peaceful and content. When she reached the end of the first chapter, Tabitha looked up to find Warren watching her. I have heard you read that book a dozen times, he said. and it still moves me every time. Not just the story, but hearing your voice bring it to life. That will never grow old." "Good," Tabitha said, setting the book aside and moving to sit beside him. "Because I plan to keep reading to you for the rest of our lives." Warren pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low. Outside, Wyoming stretched vast and beautiful under a canopy of stars. Inside, surrounded by books and memories and love, Tabitha felt complete. The girl who had been mocked for reading had found a man who cherished her for it. Together, they had built a life of purpose and passion, raising children who valued both learning and hard work, contributing to their community in lasting ways. As the years rolled forward into the new century, the Masters family continued to thrive. Thomas proved an excellent rancher, modernizing operations while respecting the land and traditions his father had established. He and Mary eventually had 4 children, all of whom grew up surrounded by books and cattle, education, and wide open spaces. Catherine married in her early 30s, choosing a professor she met at an education conference. They settled in Laramie, where she taught at the university, while continuing to consult with rural schools across the state. She never forgot her roots, visiting home regularly and maintaining close ties with the school that bore her family's influence. Samuel returned to Wyoming as a veterinarian, establishing a practice that served ranchers across 3 counties. He married a fellow veterinarian, and they built a life together serving the animals and people of Wyoming. Through it all, through grandchildren and great-grandchildren, through the passing of friends and the changing of times, Warren and Tabitha held fast to each other and the rituals that sustained them. Every evening found them together, sharing stories and thoughts, connected by their love of literature and each other. When Warren was 73 and Tabitha 67, his heart finally began to fail. Dr. Harrison, long retired and replaced by a younger physician, was frank about the prognosis. Warren had perhaps a few months, maybe a year if they were fortunate. Warren took the news calmly. "I have had a good life," he told Tabitha that evening. "Longer than I expected, fuller than I ever dreamed. I have no regrets." "I have one," Tabitha said, her voice breaking. "I regret that I will have to live without you." "You will not be alone," Warren said, taking her hand. "You have our children, our grandchildren. You have your work and your books. You will be fine." "I will survive," Tabitha corrected. "But I will never be fine without you. You are my heart, Warren. You have been for almost 40 years. They made the most of the time they had left. Warren gradually turned over all ranch operations to Thomas, spending his days with Tabitha instead. They would sit on the porch in good weather, reading and talking and watching the land they both loved. Their children visited often, bringing grandchildren who filled the house with life and noise. Every evening, Tabitha read to Warren as she had done for nearly 4 decades. His hearing was not what it had been, so she read more slowly and clearly. Sometimes he would drift off during her reading, and she would continue anyway, her voice a familiar comfort. One evening in late spring, with wildflowers blooming across the prairie and the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Warren asked Tabitha to read Sonnet 116 again. "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments." She read it slowly, her voice thick with emotion, remembering the first time she had read these words to him when they were newly engaged. Then it had been about hope and possibility. Now it was about a love that had endured every test, that had proven as unchanging as the poem promised. When she finished, Warren opened his eyes and smiled at her. "That is how I have loved you," he said. "Unchanging, unshakable, the one constant in my life. And you have been mine," Tabitha said, tears streaming down her face. My constant, my love, my everything. Warren died peacefully 3 weeks later, in his sleep with Tabitha beside him. His last conscious words had been to ask her to read to him, and she had chosen passages from the Odyssey about Odysseus's long journey home. "I am home," Warren had murmured before drifting off. "I have been home since the day I met you." The funeral was enormous, attended by hundreds of people whose lives the master's family had touched over the decades. Former students, ranch hands, fellow ranchers, teachers, friends from across Wyoming and beyond. They spoke of Warren's integrity, his vision, his devotion to family and community. But Tabitha knew the truth that lay beneath all those accomplishments. He had been, first and always, a man who valued love and learning, who had seen worth in a woman the world had dismissed. The months after Warren's death were the hardest of Tabitha's life. The house felt empty without him, the evenings hollow without his presence. She tried reading aloud still, but her voice would break and she would have to stop, overwhelmed by memories. Her children surrounded her with love and support. Thomas and Mary insisted she stay at the ranch, in the home she had shared with Warren. Catherine visited monthly, always bringing new books they could discuss. Samuel stopped by whenever he was in the area, checking on his mother's health and spirits. Slowly, painfully, Tabitha found her way forward. She began volunteering at the school again, reading to the younger children who delighted in her expressive voice and vast repertoire of stories. She organized the lending library more extensively, creating a real catalog system and expanding the collection. She also returned to writing, working on a memoir about her life with Warren and the changes she had witnessed in Wyoming education over half a century. The work was therapeutic, letting her remember and honor the man she had loved while preserving their story for future generations. On what would have been their 45th wedding anniversary, Tabitha sat in the parlor with her children and grandchildren gathered around. She had asked them to come for a special reason. "Your father and I had a tradition," she told them. "Every night for 40 years, I read to him. It was how our love story began, and it sustained us through everything we faced. I want to pass that tradition on to you." Reading together, sharing stories, it is a way to connect, to learn, to love. "Promise me you will carry it forward." Thomas spoke for all of them. "We promise, Mama. We have seen what you and Papa built together, how strong your love was. If reading together helped create that, then we will honor it." So the tradition continued. Thomas read to his children and grandchildren. Catherine read to her students and her own family. Samuel read to his wife and children. The gift that Warren had given Tabitha, asking her to read to him when the world mocked her for loving books, rippled outward through generations. Tabitha lived to be 83, sharp and engaged until the very end. On her last evening, surrounded by family in the home she had shared with Warren for so many years, she asked her granddaughter to read to her. The girl chose Jane Eyre, knowing it had been one of her grandmother's favorites. As the familiar words washed over her, Tabitha closed her eyes and smiled. She could almost hear Warren's voice asking for just one more chapter, could almost feel his presence beside her in their old chairs by the fire. "I am coming, my love," she whispered. "I have so many stories to tell you." She passed peacefully that night, her hand held by her children, her life full and complete. She had been mocked for reading books, but she had found a rancher who said, "Read to me every night." And together, they had built something beautiful, a family, a community, a legacy of love and learning that would endure for generations. At her funeral, held in the same church where she and Warren had married nearly 5 decades earlier, her children spoke of her accomplishments, the school system she had helped build, the hundreds of students she had influenced, the changes she had brought to how rural Wyoming thought about education. But what they remembered most, what they honored above all else, was the love story she had lived with their father. Thomas read Sonnet 116 at the service, his voice strong and clear. When he finished, he added his own words. My parents taught us that love built on shared values and mutual respect can endure anything. They showed us that intelligence and passion are not opposed to domestic happiness, but rather essential to it. They proved that two people who truly see and value each other can build a life of purpose and joy. That is their legacy to all of us. Tabitha was buried beside Warren on a hill overlooking the Big Sky Ranch, with the mountains visible in the distance and the prairie stretching endlessly in all directions. Their shared headstone bore a simple inscription beneath their names and dates. They loved books, each other, and the life they built together. The school they had founded continued to operate, eventually growing into a full K-12 system that served the region for generations. The lending library became a full public library, housed in a beautiful building donated by their children. The ranch thrived under Thomas's management, and eventually his children's, maintained with the same balance of tradition and innovation that Warren had exemplified. But perhaps their greatest legacy was the understanding that love could take many forms, that a shared passion for learning could be as binding as any other connection. The girl who had been mocked for reading books had found a man who cherished her for that very quality. Together, they had proven that true partnership requires respect for each other's minds as well as hearts, that the strongest marriages are built on friendship and shared values as much as romance. And every night in the homes of their descendants, parents and grandparents would gather children close and read aloud, passing down stories and traditions and the abiding truth that Tabitha and Warren had lived. That in sharing the books we love with the people we love, we create something precious, and enduring that time cannot diminish. The Wild West had been a harsh place for a woman who valued learning over convention, but Tabitha had found her place in it, had carved out a life of meaning and purpose. She had been strong enough to resist a future that did not suit her, brave enough to take a chance on employment that others considered scandalous, and wise enough to recognize love when it came in the form of a quiet rancher asking her to read to him. Their story became legend in that part of Wyoming, the educated rancher and his book-loving wife, who had built an empire based not just on cattle and land, but on literacy and opportunity. Children grew up hearing about them, understanding that their own access to education and books came from the vision of two people who had refused to accept that intelligence and learning were luxuries rather than necessities. And sometimes, late at night when the wind whispered across the Wyoming plains, people swore they could still hear it, a woman's voice reading aloud, full of expression and love, and a man's contented sigh as he listened to the woman he cherished sharing the stories they both loved. The tradition lived on, as true and lasting as the love that had created it, a testament to two people who had found each other across the barriers of convention and built something beautiful that would endure long after they were gone.